What did we learn yesterday?
We learned a lot of stuff.
We learned how to,
We created some arrays.
yes,
Created some arrays. What did we use those arrays for?
To specify what we wanted to target, which were numbers.
Yes, we said, hey, let's list out all of the numbers and then let's figure out if they're pushing one of those numbers. And if they are, we'll do this stuff. Otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and ignore it. What else did we learn yesterday?
I had a quick question for you, Max.
Yes.
We have week 8, day 1, 2, and 4. We don't have day 3.
Let me go fix that. I meant to post day 3 and obviously posted day 4 by mistake. Okay, that should be fixed if you refresh now.
All right, thank you.
another thing we learned was how to make our keyboard number buttons connect to our code.
Yeah, what was that called? Document.add what?
Key
Down.
I think.
down.
Press.
Key down through the event listener, right? So we said, hey, listen for an event. And then the event listener is like, well, what event do you want me to listen for? So we said key down. And then it was like, well, what do you want me to do on that key down, right? So we said, okay, now we want to do all of this code to detect if it's a number or all of that kind of good stuff. So what else from yesterday? Any light bulb moments?
Schneider posted a question in the chat, Max.
Yeah, deprecated code is not dead code. So deprecated code or depreciated code, I've seen both of them, mean that it's a piece of the code that still works, but is no longer preferred, right? So there is some newer version of doing it. I don't know. I would guess that var is considered deprecated in JavaScript. Is var deprecated? Let's see. It is considered obsolete. Yeah, it's basically considered deprecated at this point. So deprecated code just means that, hey, it's still around. You can still use it. It will still work in different browsers, but it's no longer preferred because there is a newer version or a newer way of doing it. Anything else from yesterday that we want to review, or any free code camp exercises before we get into our class tonight?
Well, I have to say that I felt incredibly confused last night and frustrated. So aside from the fact that I need to schedule a one-on-one, is there any specific challenge in code camp that you'd recommend, or?
There's not. And the problem with that, well, yeah, I mean, I could give you a snarky answer of yes, all 156 of them. And I realize that that's saying a lot, but if you look at what we did last night, we really broke down a lot. Like some of those lines of code contained 4 or 5 of the exercises total, right? So for example, when we initialized the array, we made the array, we put values in it, we covered the syntax of the array, and all of that for just one line of code, right? So it's really tough to say, like, I'm sure I could go through and cherry pick, review the code, go through everything in free code camp, and then be like, these are the 45 exercises that cover what we did last night. Yes, we could, but at some point in the next 2.5 weeks, we're going to be working on projects that cover all or almost all of all the 156 different exercises. So what I would say is work in reverse, right? So when you're looking at the code and you're like, it's a square bracket, I know a square bracket means an array, but I'm really not understanding what that array is doing. Go back to Free Code Camp and look through all of the challenges that have the word array in them. And then start clicking through those and saying, oh, you know what? This looks closest to our code that we did. Let me go reread that and see if that helps me understand it, right? There are kind of two kinds of learners. There are people who learn JavaScript by completing everything in Free Code Camp, and then they go, well, I did all of that, so I'm good to start writing my own JavaScript. And there are people who say, just show me all the JavaScript working, and then I'll work my way backwards in order to understand how it's all working, right? And it's okay if you learn one way or the other, but that our bootcamp curriculum is so project-based that that's kind of what you're getting out of class, right? And so what you should be doing if you're not that kind of learner is pumping the brakes a little bit, right? During class saying, hey, I don't understand what that line is doing. Can we go back in class and kind of talk through that? But you have to be careful there, because if you see 10 lines getting written, and then you get to the end of the 10 lines and you're like, oh, I don't understand any of them, that's not really going to work, right? You've got to go down and break it down line by line and say, all right, there are periods in this line. Let me break it down from there. Let me understand that these parentheses are calling a function. Let me understand that the right half of the equal runs and figures out what gets stored, and then it gets stored into the left half of the equal, right? The goal here is that you understand not only what code to write, but more importantly, what the computer is doing when it's executing your code.
Mm-hmm.
So Free Code Camp will help you on what code to write, but during class, that's the level that you want to get to, is after that line has been written, what is the computer doing at each piece of that line in order to make it execute?
Okay, what is the computer doing? Thank you very much, Max.
Yeah, no problem. Being part of that frustration is just that the boot camp goes fast, right? So part of the frustration is, whenever you've gotten a good workout in and you're like, I hurt everywhere, but that means I got a good workout. That's kind of part of the programming and boot camp in general. The other part of that is saying, all right, what can I do to prep myself to not be frustrated today, right? What can I do? And when I am getting frustrated, part of frustration is sometimes not knowing where you're frustrated. So focusing in on, all right, I'm frustrated. Why am I frustrated? If I can just capture why I'm frustrated, then I know where to ask for help. Right? Whether that's Free Code Camp, whether that's during a one-on-one, whether that's interrupting me during class, it's hard for me to hear I'm frustrated and I'm like, what would you like me to do about that? Right? But when you say I'm frustrated because I don't understand the last 2 or 3 lines of code, right? That's when we can say, okay, let's break those lines of code down, go by piece. And when you say, that's it right there, I lost you. You had it, but I lost you. Then I can say, all right, either we can dive into this more in class, or here's the Free Code Camp exercise, or here's the W3 schools to read more about this, right? So it's just breaking down into that level of where, why, how are you frustrated, not just that you are frustrated. And sometimes that helps figure it out from there.
That's great advice.
Zona, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to offer some advice as well. So for me, what worked is while I was doing my code, was literally writing comments on why is this code written, or why is this section written, so that if you know that this is what this function does, or this is why we're using this function, you're able to understand it and go back to, Free Code Camp, or go back to the cheat sheets to be like, okay, so this is why he used this line of code. So that literally is what helped me. And that's why I kept interrupting you, Max, yesterday so much, is because I wanted to understand, why am I writing this comment and why is this section being used, so I can get a better clarification on it. So that to me made a tremendous difference for me in understanding why is this code being written like that. And I messaged people on here and I'm like, hey guys, just so you know, I'm commenting these codes. I think you should do it too if you want to follow along because it's helping me. So that is one advice I would do, is just if we do have a code to do today, start with commenting on it. See how it just connects the dots, really. I think that's how my brain worked, and that's what worked for me. So I just wanted to offer that.
No code today. Thought we'd just take a night off and just hang out together, or maybe grab a drink.
I mean, I have wine downstairs, so you tell me.
Totally joking. Yeah, and I think part of it is also realizing that like our education system is so focused on here's how you do it, go do it, and if you do it right, you get that grade, right? And that's how we taught cohort 3, is we had these homework assignments that was like, turn in what we worked on during class. And all you're doing is like panting, trying to keep up with all of this code, right? It is so much better to say, okay, let me just go along for the ride here because I don't need to turn this in. No one is asking me, hey, at the end of this, we want to see your output. Really, this is the opportunity to learn, right? And that's why in the daily outlines, I have been posting our final code for the evening, right? So this weather app code, when you pop that open, this weather app code has this final folder in here. And if you go into the final, it's going to show you all the JavaScript that we're writing tonight, right? And it also has those starting files as well. So if you, come on. If you go back here to the starter, you can see like, all right, this is my starting place, right? This is where we're going to kind of jump off of. But even if you go a little bit further back to last night's outline, which is probably going to be a slightly better example of this, I linked to the browser calculator, and this was available right at the beginning of class that has all of our final code that we're writing. Now, obviously, I don't always stick directly to this, but all of those same concepts are in there, right? And so it feels weird to not be keeping up or following along with the teacher, but that's not the expectation, right? The expectation here is, hey, let's look at what code is getting written and understand why it's getting written. What is this code doing? How is the computer executing it? You'll have a chance in your homework to prove that you know all of this, whether it's that free code camp homework where you're, going through challenge by challenge and learning in bite-sized pieces, or whether it's coming up with your capstone check-ins, right, where you're showing, hey, I've started to actually implement some of this. The next capstone check-in is only HTML based, but then we start layering in our JavaScript and getting to that interactivity. So that is all coming. There are multiple ways that we check your student performance here, right? Making sure you're keeping up. It's those quizzes of understanding, right? By the way, week 8 quiz is now live on Canvas. 5 questions, half are multiple choice, half are fill in the blank. Those are all due on Sunday. We also have your homework assignments, right? Whether they are free code camp based, whether they are applying these skills, we're getting you to the point where you should start to feel a little bit more comfortable with it, right? And the week 9 and 10 homework assignments are not going to be turn in movie seats or turn in tic-tac-toe. That is just too much. It puts the pressure on you during class of I got to keep up, I got to keep up. That's not the point of those assignments, right? The point of those assignments is to say, let's build a JavaScript project that touches on all 156 ideas or topics or challenges that you went through in free code camp, right? And so we're not expecting you to get out of the gate and be able to make this from scratch, right? This is, let's expose you to the project and let's get you having practice with those concepts in a hands-on approach of how do we apply these? Because the flip side of free code camp is sometimes you're like, okay, array, I got it. Array, animals, I put the data types in it, whatever. But then there's no follow through on that of, well, let's loop through an array. which is the most common way we would use an array or access an array by looping over all of that. Well, free code camp covers loops and it covers arrays, but it doesn't cover using loops to go over arrays, right? And so that's where our curriculum is focused in on, is how are you using these concepts in the real world? And that's why our projects are built the way they are. Schneider, go ahead.
FCC question regarding the JavaScript stuff.
Yep.
During the JavaScript slides, we learned about the variables, I mean the data types, but then FCC introduces bigint and symbol, and I'm like, what is that? I don't know if I pronounced the bigint part right though.
Symbol is not something I have ever used in JavaScript, ever. In my decade of writing JavaScript code, I have never used a symbol. That's not saying that I'm being ignorant there. I definitely could be, but I have never used a symbol, so I wouldn't spend too much time on diving into that. And then can you spell the other one for me?
I think it means bigint.
Yeah.
It's a big int, B-I-G-I-N-T. Got
Okay.
it. A big int.
I pronounced it wrong.
Remember when he's like Swarmy, Swampson, oh, Samsonite, I was way off.
Yeah, so a big int is literally, there's only so many, there's a number can only hold a number up to a certain size. And I'm sure they tell you on here it's like 32 bytes, which means it goes up to large integers. So that is the biggest number, I am guessing, you can store in a typical number. So if you're storing a number bigger than that, you specifically need to use this big int. I am familiar with big ints, have never had to use that. Obviously, in a lot of scientific applications, you could be dealing with numbers larger than this. But in general, big int is something where it's like, okay, technically it's another data type in JavaScript, so we should cover all of the data types. But of all of the data types in JavaScript, really the only ones you need to worry about here are null and undefined, which kind of cluster together. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're similar. A Boolean, true or false, a number, a string, and then an array or an object, which is considered a advanced or complex data type compared to these, which are called primitive data types, a little bit more basic, in other words.
Got you, Max. Thank you.
You will never see me using a symbol in my code. You will never see me using a big int in my code. With that said, there's a time and place for them. I just have never needed to professionally use them. Anything else that we want to cover? Undefined and null are not technically the same thing according to the computer, but they are very similar. An undefined variable is when you define the variable but not define the value for the variable. Null is something that you can set when you want to clear it out, right? So it's kind of like setting it back equal to 0, but you can set it equal to null. It's very rare that you would set something to undefined. That is generally considered bad code, but we're getting in the weeds there. Undefined and null are both falsy values, so they, but to the computer, for the most part, they are treated as the same. A lot of people get in the weeds and they go, whoa, JavaScript works this way under the hood, and null and undefined aren't actually, and I'm like, okay, but the general idea is the same. And in a lot of programming languages, they don't use undefined at all. They just default everything to null. So yes, technically they are not the same, but whenever you're writing any practical code, they are. Okay, so we are going to dive in to class tonight, And for once, I'm actually going to encourage everyone to copy and paste. So I am going to put this code in the, I'm going to put a link to this code in the live stream. I'm going to open up my VS Code, and I'm going to file, open folder. In my week 8, I'm going to create a day 3. I'm going to pop that open. I'm going to have VS Code fight me. There we go. Open day 3. And I'm going to create a new file called school.js. And we are going to run this through the terminal. So I'm going to open an integrated terminal. And then I'm going to pop open that link I put in Slack and copy from schools all the way down to line 65. So go ahead and copy that. Head back into your VS Code and go ahead and paste it. So you should have line 1 all the way down to 65 in your code. Basically, you want to see the const schools all the way down to print out the grade average for each teacher and school. And I will start a live stream on this as well. Oh, if you would rather follow along that way. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on here. We've got a very complicated data type here that is completely valid. So we have our square bracket. We know our square bracket is going to be an array. And inside of that array, every index or item in the array is an object. Well, how do we know it's an object? Because it's got a curly brace. Okay, well, inside that curly brace, because it's an object, we have our key on the left side of the colon and our value on the right side of the colon. But as we see from this next key value pair, a value can be any data type. So the type up here is elementary, but the data type for teachers is actually another array. So if we get all the way down to the first student here, we're going through an array of the schools that has each school as an object. And in that object, there is an array of teachers. And inside that array of teachers, every teacher is an object. And inside that object, we have students that has an array of strings. Holy moly, that's a lot going on. So what I have posed down here is a couple questions we're going to work on. The first one says print out all of the school types. Okay, well, in order to achieve that, how would we go about printing out all of the school types? We see the school type here is elementary. We've got one called middle, and we've got one called high. How are we going to tell the computer to print out all of the school types?
Call the type.
Call the type. That's the first way of doing it. So I'm going to test here. I'm going to say console.log schools. And I'm going to go down in my terminal and I do my node school.js, and I get the whole thing getting printed out. Okay, so what I do here is I say schools.type, and that's just going to magically, oh no, we get undefined. Well, we can't access the type because schools is an array. So how would we go about getting inside that array to get to the type?
Would you have to change the data type or no?
Nope, we need to use
use
data inside the array.
Is
We use a bracket notation.
not type,
Yes.
do the bracket.
So we don't, we need to say schools, go get me the first school. Well, Max, you typed a 0. Remember, arrays are 0 indexed. So when we need to get the first item, we start at 0. When we need to get the second item, that's actually index number 1. So if I save this and go run my code, I get elementary. Well, I said print out all the school types. Well, that's pretty easy, right? We can just copy and paste that and say, get the first one and get the second one. So now I've got all my school types printing out. All right, let's break that down. We went to our schools and we said, give me the 0 index. That means I am getting this whole object. I'm getting access to that whole object right there. Remember, this is index 1 down here, but index 0, I now have access to the object, so I can start diving in using my dot notation to get my type out of elementary. So when I say, give me the 0 index, that gives me the whole object. Then inside that object, get out the type, and that type is going to output my elementary down here. Okay, that's cool and all, but what happens if I come up here and I add a new type of school called intermediate? Well, of course, I could just add another one down here, but I want all of the school types to print out no matter how many different schools there are. How would I go about doing that?
Loop over them.
What's that?
You gotta loop over them.
I'm going to loop over them. What kind of loop am I going to use here?
Maybe 4.
Let's use a for loop. And we're going to use what is called a for of loop. For of loops are super effective whenever we're looping over an array. So we're going to say for const school, we need a place when we're looping over each one of these schools to get the individual school out of the array. So we're going to say for const school of schools. Where's our schools coming from? That's our big array up here. What's going to happen is each time this loop runs, we are going to get access to each individual school. And we can see that because what prints out every time this loop runs is the entire object. So what we're able to do is, because each time this loop runs, it's pulling that big object outside the array of objects and storing the object into the individual school. What we're able to do is say school.type. And now when I run that, I get elementary, middle, high, and intermediate. Remember, what's happening here is that each time we get a new school out of the schools array, it gets stored in that variable called school.
And just to clarify, because it was a little confusing to me at first, technically you can make that const school anything, but it helps if it makes sense as a single unit of whatever you're looping over, right?
Exactly. We could call this elephant if we wanted to, but we would just need to be consistent with it down here. So anytime we pull out a single item of the array that we're looping over, right, which is why it is a for of loop. What we're saying is pull out each item of that array. So that whole object gets stored in here, and then whatever gets stored in here is what we can use down here. So it is somewhat more common to say item of item.type, but I don't like using item, because what ends up happening is sometimes we need to loop over things outside of that item. So now we're like, well, what kind of item is that? So naming convention wise, it is much better to call it the singular version of whatever you're looping over, so that you're more specific in what you're logging out. Any other questions there?
My code says that there's an error. I don't know if I.
Go ahead, share your screen. You are trying to run node schools, and the file name is called school.
Oh, so I'll just change this to schools.
or do node school.js instead.
Is it gonna matter?
Nope.
Okay. That's probably why.
Okay, so now you have a different error, and I think it's because you're using the wrong type of comments.
And I just
Uh,
left.
line 1 and 2, just delete those.
I'll just delete these two.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So did we use a for loop because we had to loop it 3 times?
We used the for loop because we knew the number of times the for loop needed to run.
Gotcha.
So
And then,
for
yeah.
loops are by far the most common type of for loop, the most common type of loop to run. Generally, you use a for loop whenever you know the number of times it's going to run. In other words, it's going to run 4 times because there were 4 schools in the array. You use a while loop when the conditions of the loop are based off of the output of the loop. And then you use recursion whenever you have a nested data structure where you don't know how many layers deep the data is going to go.
Okay, so use that when you don't know things. Gotcha.
Okay, we feeling like we understand what's happening here? We feel like we understand, hey, this code is actually going to run 4 times. We can actually prove that, right? We can say, let count equal 0. And every time you come into this loop, add 1 to the count. And once you're done logging out the schools, log out the count. Okay, we got 4 here. Why did we get 4 here? Because the first time this loop ran, it went to the schools array, and what did it put in here? This whole elementary school object. So school is now equal to this whole object in here. Now we say add 1 to the count. Count now becomes 1. And then we come into the console log school. What does school equal? It doesn't equal this whole array anymore. It just equals what this object is. So because we have access to that individual school, we grab the type and we log out elementary. Where do we grab the type? We grab the type, we log out elementary. It comes down here, it hits this curly brace, and it goes, okay, let me go back up to the schools array. What is the next school? The next school is this entire middle school. So now school is not equal to the elementary school object anymore. It's equal to that middle school. That's why we get middle coming out. So we added 1 to the count. Count is now 2. We log out middle and we go back up and run it again. I know this is really basic, but super important to understand. What does school equal? That school equals the object because we're looping over the array time and time again until there's nothing left in that array. Okay. So now we need to print out all of the teachers in the middle school. Want you guys to try that on your own. Try and get all of the teachers' names to print out from the middle school. Launching a poll, see how you guys do. I'm stopping my share. I'm going to attempt it myself. All right, how are we doing? All right, let's take a stab at this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, I'm trying to get to the middle school. So I'm going to go up to my data and I'm looking at schools, and this is my elementary school. So I'm going to ignore index 0. I'm going to go down and my middle school is index 1. So I want to make sure I can get to that before I even get to my teachers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to console.log my schools bracket 1. And I want to make sure that my middle school comes out. So when I run that code in my terminal, I see that the type middle comes out. But the schools 1 is this whole object. Now, what do I care about in the object? The teachers, right? This is think of this as an onion. Every time that we have another square bracket or dot notation, we're going another layer deeper. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to say, go get me the teachers. So when this prints out, I shouldn't see type middle anymore. I should only see the array of all of my teachers. When I run that, I now have Miss Johnson and Mr. Williams. Okay, well, I could just do a console log teachers bracket 0.name and bracket 1.name, but we want to practice with our array. Or for loop, right? And we know that this is an array because we see that square brace down there. So that means we can take this console log and say for const teacher of the teachers in the middle school. Whoa, whoa, whoa. How did I know it was teachers in the middle school? Because I did my bracket 1 there. That means that every time I console.log a teacher here, I should get each individual teacher, which means at this point, all I need to do is add in their teacher's name. This type of data structure is what you're going to be working with in 3 weeks with Ryan. Ryan's going to come in and help you start working on APIs, and you're going to use the New York Times API, which has all kinds of information about books and the authors and related books and all kinds of data structures here. So this is trying to prep you guys for saying, how do I dig into that data? How do I deal with lists of data? How do I loop over them to get out the things that I expect? And when we're looping over things, we can actually do nested for loops. This one says print out all the class names along with the type of the school. Okay, well, I need to go through all of the schools. And while I'm going through all of the schools, I need to go through all of the teachers. And when I'm going through all of the teachers, I need to get access to each one of their classes. So here, I'm going to do a nested for loop. What I'm going to say here is I want to get access to each school. And to make sure that's working, I'm going to console log out my school to make sure I get the whole school in here. Okay, now that I'm looping over each one of those schools, I want to get each one of the teachers. So I'm going to say for const teacher of, now I can't just say teachers here because it's like, what is teachers? Teachers is inside of the school object. So in here, I need to say school.teachers. All right, so we're breaking this up a little bit. We are saying my schools is my giant array, And every time that I go over each school, I get access to each individual school. But that school down here has a bunch of teachers. Each individual teacher is going to get dumped in to my teacher variable here. That means that when I'm looking at each individual teacher has a class that I'm going to get access to. So because of that, what I can do is I can say console.log my teacher.class. So I go through here, I console log it all out. I take out my console log school because that's getting in the way. And now I get all of the classes that are taught. However, I didn't meet the requirement. It says print out all of the class names along with the type of school. Okay, so up here, my teacher.class doesn't have the type. The teacher doesn't have the type. The type is all the way up in the school up here. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm inside this for loop, I am able to print out the school.type with a dash in between and the teacher.class. So this school is coming from up here, just like this school is coming from up here. And I only have access to the teacher in here because we've defined it here. So when I run this, I get all of the output that I expect. It's a bummer that theoretical programming is only taught in high school, not middle school, but you know, some people are slower learners. All right, so what I mean by that is, remember how we were talking about scope? I don't have access to the individual teacher here. If I run this, I get an error message immediately. Teacher is not defined. What do you mean teacher is not defined? I just said const teacher up here. Because it is after this curly brace, the only place that I have access to teacher is inside this for loop. So I can't get access to the teacher unless I'm inside this for loop.
That's the same mistake I made. I tried to use teacher and it was like, yeah, no, on this, that's anonymous or whatever.
All right, how are we feeling?
Better than that, now that you define it, because I got the undefined, teacher is not defined also, and I was like, what's going on? So what you just did made sense.
Yep, we only have access to this teacher inside of here. So how many times does this console log run?
Five.
Once?
4 times?
5. You were right. So let's break that down, right? The first time it runs, it says, go get the elementary school. We don't care about all the other schools. Okay, now once we're in the elementary school, go loop over all of the teachers. So we loop over pirate history and coding for youngins. Okay, now this for loop is done. It says there are no more teachers in this school. So we go to this outer for loop and it says, okay, we're done with the whole elementary school. Let's go down to the middle school. Okay, now in the middle school, let's go loop over all those teachers. Okay, we get art class and science class. Now we're again done with this inner for loop. So we go to this outer for loop and it goes on to the next school. So we go on to our high school. It goes to loop over the teachers, and there's only one teacher in the high school. So it outputs theoretical programming, finishes this for loop, goes to this outer for loop and goes, there are no more schools. So we're finally done with that loop and we come down here.
So it pretty much loops every single time it has to find the answer within that function for the school.
Correct.
Gotcha. But mine, I don't know why, but my code says console not a function.
Are your curly braces in the right place and is console spelled correctly?
Console is spelled correctly. Let me just put in another ending curly brace. Nope.
Okay, share your screen. Let's take a look. Line 65. Console is not a function. There you go.
God. Okay. Is that how it should come up?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I want you guys to try this one on your own. Try and get all of the students' names to print out. Keep in mind here that we use a nested for loop here. You're going to nest another for loop all the way down at this level. So remember here, there's a trickle effect. We get all the schools that gets access to the individual school. That individual school gives us access to the teachers. The teacher gives us access to the individual teacher, which means we're able to access the teacher down here. So what you need to do for this print out all the students' name, you're going to need both of these for loops, but you're going to need another for loop in here to loop over each individual student. And I'm restarting the poll so I know where you guys are at. Really important that you guys try to figure this one out. Because if you can't get this, you're going to get lost in the API module. And from there, it spirals downhill. So push yourselves here, right? Say, all right, I've got the loop going over all the schools. I've got the loop going all over the teachers, but going over all of the teachers of the school that I'm in. So how can I now do another loop over the students of the teacher to get their name to come out?
Mm-mm.
Does anyone think they almost have it? Or Trell, go ahead, share your screen.
We
You're
can't hear
muted.
you.
Thanks. I gotta finish the code, but I'll still show what I
Sure.
have.
Oh my God. That's
So right here, I was thinking I have to do the const students of school dot students, and then I have to do my console log to prove that it works. But that's my area
You're-
of thing.
You're on the right track. However, let me request remote. Let's go up a little bit here.
Okay.
We're looking at our schools, right? We dove
Right.
into our teachers. Oops, we dove into our teachers. Now, where are our students? Our students are here.
After the class.
Well, they're part of the teachers array,
Right.
which
Right.
is part of the schools array.
Okay.
So if we're looking at this, our students don't come from the school. Our students come from the teacher.
Teachers.
So what we're going to do, because we're already getting access to each individual teacher right here, we want to say teacher dot students. And now we are able, because student is not an object. The students don't have name, colon, and their name, right? It's just a string in there. So what we're able to do is just add a console.log student. S is not defined. What did I do? Line 65.
Yeah, I never finished that.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to comment this out for now.
Okay.
And now we get schools of schools, school of teacher, 74. Did we modify our initial data? Ah, this one's causing us problems because that one doesn't have any teachers in it. So now we get all of the students printing out.
Okay.
Let me go over that one more time. What we have is we've got our for loop already going on, going over all of the teachers. But those teachers are, the students are inside the teacher's object. So because there are several students, we need to loop over all of them again. But they're inside the teacher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another for loop to get each individual student of the teacher students. This teacher is not coming from the school teachers. This individual teacher is coming right here. And each one of those teachers has students that gets access to each individual student. That means that this student is going to give me Toya, and then Snooty, and then Cutthroat. And then it's going to say, am I done? I'm done with this teacher. Let me move on to the next teacher. I get Abigail and Estelle. Okay, now I'm done with this school. I'm going to move on to the next school. Now I get James and Robert. Then I go and I move on to the next teacher. And when I have that teacher, I get John and I get Andy. And then I say, I'm out of teachers. So I move on to the next school. I get Taylor, and then I get Jackson. And so what I need to do here is just say console.log the student. Now I don't need student.name here or anything like that because the student is just a string. So if I go ahead and run that code again, I get everything out.
I had the exact same thing, but it kept on giving me an error. I was just outside of the second floor. So I had to erase the curly brackets, but that's exactly what I had. It just kept on giving me an error.
That will do it, right? We don't have access to the student here. We only have access to the teacher. So we have access to the teachers.student, but we don't have access to each individual student because we are outside of this curly brace. Okay. Last one we're going to do here, and that's really, this one's going to test us on our curly brace scope, right? Really understanding why that scope matters. So it says print out the grade average for each, and I'm going to say school here. So all I want to do is print out the school's grade average. Now you know what, let's push ourselves. Let's say teacher and school. So I need to loop over all of this stuff again because I need access. Let's look at our object again to our grades in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, I need to loop over each school, const school of schools. In here, I need to loop over each one of my teachers. And if I loop over my teachers, I should be able to get access to my teacher dot grades. So I run that and I get teachers is not defined. Well, where's my teachers coming from? It's coming from the school of the teachers. So if I say school.teachers, now I get my data down here. The problem is that that's in an array. Those dag-nabbit arrays keep on getting in our way. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for const grade of teacher dot grades, console log out the individual grade. So I run that, and now I've got all of my individual grades here. Okay, now let's think about how we do our math. On average, you add the two numbers together and then divide by the number of items that you're averaging together, right? So add them all together. So I want to add all of the grades together because I'm going to start with the teacher's average. I want to figure that out. Well, in order to keep track of that, I need to figure out when does this reset? I don't want this to reset every time we get a new grade. If I put it in here, it would reset that value every time we run it because it's that local scope. It's only happening inside this for loop. But I do want it to reset for every new teacher. So what I'm going to say is let grade count equal 0 and let total grades equal 0. Then every time I get a new grade, I want to make the grade count go up by 1. And I want to add the total grades. I want to add whatever this current grade is. But I only want that calculation to happen after we've processed all of the grades for this particular teacher. So I'm going to say console.log teacher.name plus a colon plus the total grades divided by the grade count. Now, if I took this console log and I move that inside the for loop, look at what havoc that causes. I get Mr. Smith has a 94. No, just kidding. He's got a 96.5. Well, why is that running? That's because that's happening for every grade. It's showing us a running average, basically, of what's happening there. We don't want that. We want all the grades to be added up together first, and then we can figure out what the grade actually is. So we're going to say, after you're done totaling all the grades, but before you move on to the next teacher, go ahead and console log out the teacher's name. How do we know it's happening before we move on to the next teacher? Because this curly brace lines up with our teachers array here. So the scope really, really matters here, because what we're saying is that grade count gets reset every time you go in and get the next teacher. So the last one we're going to do here is keeping track of that school's grade. We don't want to define the school's grades here, because if we do, it's going to reset every time we move on to the next teacher. In order to prevent that, we're going to say let school total equal 0 and let the school count equal 0. Now, every time that we stumble onto another grade, we are going to add 1 to the school total. I'm sorry, 1 to the school count. And we're also going to add that to the school total based off of whatever grade is in here. Now, if I console log this out here, I have another problem. We get Mr. Smith, elementary school has a 96.5. Then we get Mr. Matthews, and elementary school now has a 92. Well, we're not done calculating the elementary. That's because we've got to watch our for loops here. This is our teachers. This is our grades. Just like we did with our closing HTML tags, we can do that with our JavaScript comments as well. We can say end of grades loop. We can say this is the end of our teacher loop. So this must be the end of our school loop. Okay, well, that's where we want it to go. We don't want to know the school's average until we've gone over all of the teachers from that school. So we're going to take this whole console log and move it right to here. And now when we run it, we will see Mr. Smith had a 96, Mr. Matthews had an 87. That means the whole school had an average of 92. Okay, Mr. Johnson from the middle school had a 95. Mr. Williams had a 75. That means the whole school's average is an 85. All right, talk to me. How are we feeling here? I know it's hump day. I know it's Wednesday. You're now officially over halfway there.
I think the hardest thing is figuring out how to get into the array itself or the object itself and figure out which one is the one that you're trying to trigger, and not being able to trigger it with just putting school.teacher.name or something like that where it would be consistent. You have to do a couple of for loops just to get to the information.
Yeah, so it turns out that computers are really bad with dealing with lists, but they are really good at dealing with each individual item inside of a list. So you can't just say, oh, give me all of the teachers in the schools. What you need to do is say, go over all of the schools to get each individual school. And now that I have the individual school, I can go over all of the teachers to get the individual teacher. And now that I'm going over the individual teacher, I can get to their name. So that's why we need so many loops here, is because computers are actually really terrible with dealing with lists. They're really good at dealing with individual things inside of that list. And while this object or this array looks crazy, this is very common to see data types that are this nested with our different objects and our arrays and all of that. So after the break, we're actually going to go through and build our own data structure. And we're going to say, does this need to be an object? Does this need to be an array? Where does this all nest together? We're actually going to go back to the weather app and say, how do we build out these objects and arrays? And then how can we use our JavaScript to update that information when the user changes the location? So that's what we're working our way up to. I know this is super boring because it's like, this isn't the fun code, right? I don't get to see this interactive, but being able to deal with these data structures is very, very important, because a data structure like this is a very common thing to see in the real world. I know it's boring. I always want to skip this exercise in the curriculum because it's not fun to work on, but it is important to be able to dive in that deep. With all of that said, I'm not going to start the weather project quite yet. So let's go on break and be back at 7:15. Welcome back, everyone. Everyone a minute to settle back in, and then we will dive back in.
Max, can I share my screen with you for a second?
Go for it.
Thank you. I think one challenge I'm having is reading the code
Okay.
the way it was written. So I'm trying to break it down like I'm used to seeing the HTML.
Okay. The problem is you broke it out. Are you trying to run it with your comments inside of it?
No.
Okay,
No.
so what's your question?
Well, I was curious if I was on the right track with everything. So that's all an object, this whole thing.
Yep.
And then this is an array inside of the object.
Yep.
This is another object inside of the array.
Yep.
And this is another array inside of the object.
Inside of an array, inside of another object, inside another array. Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right, good. I wanted to make sure I was at least getting that part right so I can continue doing that.
Yep. So if you want to think about it, right, like this is our object opening tag, and this is our object closing tag.
Mhm.
Then inside of there, we've got a key, and then this is like the value inside of the key.
Key value pair. Mhm.
Right. And then we say, okay, here's another key. And what's inside of that? That's this whole array in here.
Okay, I need to note that real quick here.
And it's actually, you said here comes a string, that should say array. There you go. And then in here, we can actually have, we know there's another array coming right here, but we can keep different data types inside that array. So we're using strings right here, and we know it's a string because of the double quote, and that's an opening quote and a closing quote, just like our opening HTML tag and our closing. But then down here, we've got another array. And
Mhm.
inside that array, now we are actually using numbers instead. And then we close that array off right there.
Okay. So that's another key.
Yep.
value.
The key in this case is just teachers, but the value, instead of it just being a simple string, is this entire big array instead.
Yeah. The value is the array.
Correct. And you want your closing star and closing slash there. There you go.
I should probably put that down there. And that's a string. Okay, Max, thank you.
No problem. All right. So speaking of complex objects and arrays and all that fun stuff, we are going to start with our weather app. We're going to get that HTML working again, and then we're going to layer in some JavaScript to make our data be reflected in a pre-built user interface. And this is actually a pretty common workflow. It's actually pretty common to have dummy data get loaded all into the interface by a front-end developer and then hand it over to a back-end developer or a JavaScript developer to take data and interactively layer it into our HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to save this as index.html in my day 3 folder. And I'm going to go head over to our week 8 day 3 outline. And I'm going to grab my weather app code. I'm going to pop that open. And I want to go to this starter.html. So I'm going to open that up. And up here in the top right, there's a lovely little double square icon. That is the equivalent of copy. So if you want to click on that, that saves you from having to highlight everything. We're going to go back down to our VS Code and paste that sucker in there. And now when we go live, we have our entire weather app in our browser. So this is just a starting point for us. This is the interface that we built a couple weeks ago, right? We're going to just reuse our whole front end code, except we're going to change it up a little bit. What I would like to do is change this location to a drop down. And to get started, we're just going to do 2 different locations, right? We're just going to say, hey, I want to be able to change between where I live and somewhere else in the world, right? Somewhere else, maybe a little less snowy. Or maybe a little more snowy. Maybe you want to go north to Tug Hill. We're going to change this to a drop down. But in order to change that to a drop down, we're going to need our data structure first. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our files. You can close your school.js if you have it open. And I'm going to create another one called weather.js. And before we get too far, I don't want to forget about linking my weather. So I'm going to go back to my index.html. I'm going to go down to the body, which is on line 91 of my code. And I'm going to say script src equals weather.js. And then in my weather.js, I'm going to put a console.log weather, baby. I'm going to switch over to my browser. I'm going to hit inspect and go to my console. And if I got weather, baby, I am all caught up and good to go. You're launching that as a poll. If you have weather, baby, showing up in your console with your whole weather interface showing up, you're all caught up and good to go.
You can go back to your code. Sorry.
Yep. I added the script tag down at the bottom and then a console log here. And all of this code came from the link in the week 8 day 3 outline. Anyone need help or need me to re-review a step?
I'm still getting set up.
So take a hard look.
Are we gonna need a style CSS for this or no?
We are not. That is because back in the day, we were writing our styles right inside our index.html. So that's why we didn't have a separate style sheet. And because we aren't modifying any of the styles based off of our JavaScript, we won't need an external style sheet. Good question, though. All right, so we got our index.html created. We went to the outline. We opened up our code. We hit the little copy icon here. We went over to our index.html. We pasted everything in. We created a new file called weather.js. We put a little console log in there to make sure everything was linked up properly. We scrolled down to the bottom, and right before our closing body tag, we added in a script, src equals weather.js. Before, we've called that script.js. Doesn't really matter what we call it as long as it lines up with the file name that we created over here. We put our console log in here. We went back over to our weather. We right-clicked, we opened the console, and what did we get out? We got our weather baby out, so we know our JavaScript is all linked up, and we are ready to rock and roll.
Can we hold on one second? So what day did you say the weather app was under? What week and day?
Today's week 8, day 3.
No, I know, but it's in the. Okay. Never mind. I was trying to use my own, but never mind.
Oh, sorry. I can probably tell you that because I'm normally pretty good about keeping the schedule up to date. Weather was week 2, day 4.
I'm just not getting weather baby appearing in my console.
Did you get your script tag added right here? That fix it, Jordan, or you need help?
I did not have that added. Thank you.
No problem.
I'm confused about something. Did you say you wanted us to start with the starter?
Yes, the code from the weather app code. If you open that link up, it will take you to this, and then you go to starter.html, and then you can hit the little copy icon up here.
That's confusing because when I open that, it just shows me CSS.
At the top of it is style CSS, but if you scroll down, you'll see the rest of the HTML is there.
Okay, I got it. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, so we've got everything set up here, and we're just gonna, for the sake of showing you what we want to happen, I'm gonna edit some of the HTML so that we can get a feel of what the end objective is, and then we'll talk about our data structure, right? How do we get our JavaScript to be able to encapsulate all of this? Okay, so what I have up here is this Manlius, New York 13104. What I would like to do is transform that into a drop-down that shows me 2 or 3 different locations that I can choose between, and then all of the weather information will change based off of what I pick. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete that location out, and instead I'm going to put a select. And inside that select, I want a couple options. One option will be Manlius, New York 13104. And the other option that I would like to use is, I don't know, use my hometown. You guys are obviously welcome to use whatever you would like in there. So I'm going to come back over to weather. And now when I expand this out, well, it ain't pretty. If I zoom out a little bit, will it fix that? No. Okay. Now I have my drop down showing up here, and when I click on it, I have my Ocean City location showing up as well. What I would like to happen is when I click in Ocean City, I would like all of this data to change. But that data is going to be relevant to whatever location that I picked. So we've got a lot of information that we need to store in here, but that location is stored inside the particular location. So we're going to start with our object. I'm going to try and fit as much on the screen here as I can. Ignore how ugly that looks. So I can take out my weather baby because I saw that in my console. I know that that's showing up. And when we start, we want to start with the highest level of data and narrow our way down in. So what I mean by that is, what's the overarching thing that's going to contain all of this data? Well, I've got two different locations that I need to store. So what are my two data types that I should be thinking about using here?
I want to
Objects.
say rules. Oh, okay. Objects.
Go ahead.
I
Shannon,
was
go ahead.
thinking, I was thinking arrays.
An array and what else?
And as he said, object.
Object. Okay. What I want to do, though, is store information about a particular location, and I happen to have two of them. So what does that lean me towards?
Key value pairs.
Key value pairs. That means object. So I'm going to do one, and I'm actually going to say my first one is 08226. That is the zip code. The other one is going to be 13104. Obviously, use whatever zip codes you want there. The reason I'm using zip codes is I know they're going to be unique, right? There may be two Syracuse, New Yorks for the weather data in different zip codes. So I'm going to use that ID because I know it's going to be unique. Okay, now I've got a ton of other data about each one of these. So what am I going to use again? I'm going to use my object again, because there's a bunch of information I want to store, but I want to store it associated with that particular location. So I'm going to say each one of these locations has an object. And now we can start going in here and breaking this down a little bit easier. We can say, hey, the icon that I want to store, say current icon, and it's going to be a string. And just like our HTML, we can actually use our emojis right in our JavaScript. So it does have to be in a string because an emoji is technically classified as a string. I'm going to hit my Control Command space, and I'm going to pick whatever icon I would like to show up there. I'll pick my little cloud. Then I've got other data that I want to show here, right? I want to show the current temp. And the current temp is a number. So we don't need a string. We can just put in 68. Then I've got to store additional information. I've got to store the precipitation, which is 55. I've got to store the humidity, which is 10. I've got to store the wind, which is, oh, I'm sorry, humidity was 40, wind was 10. Obviously, these values don't matter too much.
You have to change your spelling for precipitation.
I spelled that right, didn't I?
No, P-R-E instead of P.
Okay, not what I meant to do. Whether, there we go. Okay, so I'm going along here, and the current time I probably don't need to store in the location, right? But I do need to store the current condition. So I'll say current condition is cloudy. And none of this data is updating quite yet, right? If I change my current temp down to 38, this doesn't change here. That's okay. We've got some work to do to get that to update, right? But what I'm going down here and I'm going, all right, I've got to get all of this data in here. But all of this data is kind of grouped together, right? That's all of my forecast data. So I'm going to use that and I'm going to make a key called forecast. And in my forecast, I don't really need to break it down by Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I can just store all of that in an array because when tomorrow comes around, I just want the next 5 days worth of data. So instead, I'm going to store that in an array, but in that array, I've got objects for the name of the day, the condition, icon, and the temperature. And I'm going to have them for each day of the week. So I'm going to copy this and paste it 5 times. Then go through and just manually update your data there. And just throw in whatever you're feeling.
Just kind of a quick question regarding the zip codes that we're basically using as the keys for the
Yes.
weather data object, right? Does it matter if that zip code is a number or a string?
It does have to be a string up here because keys cannot have numbers as their values. I'm sorry, objects cannot have numbers as their keys. That's what I was trying to say. So objects, while they can have any data type as their value, their keys do have to be strings. So that's why I put those in quotes. And the other reason we put them in quotes is even though a zip code always is a number, in the case of where I grew up, the zip code started with a 0. So if we actually put that in as a number, regardless of it being in an object, it would actually drop that beginning 0 number. And so a lot of people go, oh, a zip code, that's all a number. And it's like, no, you should treat a zip code as a string because otherwise it will drop that that beginning 0. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had like gotten like a packing slip or something, and it shows 8226 is my zip code because they dropped that 0 off. They treated it as a number instead of a string. So that's why we little fun fact for you.
Got it. Thank you.
Your second zip code is a number, not a string.
Good catch. Thank you. Archel, go ahead.
Yeah, question. If you explained it already and I missed it, I apologize. But I noticed that on our JavaScript side, we didn't use document. Now, I know we have the script source where the .js that kind of ties it in, but why didn't we use document?
Because we haven't updated our document at all.
Okay.
So that's coming. But
Okay.
all we did is we defined all of this data, right? And you notice my temperature over here is 68 and it's 38 over here. That's because we haven't integrated our data yet. Our JavaScript has this object and this data and this all the keys and arrays and all of that good stuff. And our HTML has all of that content over there, and it's just chilling. And it's like, all right, you told me what weather data is, but you didn't tell me to do anything with the document yet. So I guess the JavaScript's done. So that's going to be the next step, is saying, okay, hey, when we change this weather, update the document to include all of this data.
And to clarify, this zip code is the Ocean City, not Manlius, right? So this data is for Ocean City.
Correct. And we're actually going to need to copy all of this and put it down here so that we get different information as well.
Okay.
Tika, go ahead.
Real quick, how do you get the emoji?
Control Command Space.
Control Command Space. Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing I had was when we did Weather Baby and you were able to see it in a console.
Yep.
How do I get the console to come up?
Right click over here and go to Inspect. Then from there, you should have something that says Console right next to Elements, and you can click on Console from there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so I know this is tedious. We need a second thing to play between this data. So I'm going to copy all of Ocean City's information and I'm going to paste it down into Manlius's information, that 13104 zip code. Oh, that's why I don't have 13104. Apparent and what?
And so I have a question that kind of ties in, and that's kind of the reason why I asked the first question. So just to clarify, so when you're making a key that has to be a string, right? You don't have to, if it's all letters, you don't have to like explicitly use quotes to say it's a string. But if the key is all numbers, then you have to use quotations to specify that explicitly this is a string.
Well,
right?
I thought
Because you see what I mean? Like, because like current temp, like all these keys that are also in like the zip code object, they're technically keys, but they're not like, they don't have quotes around them, right?
Correct.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas the zip codes, that's still that's technically a key,
So
but it doesn't have quotations
traditionally-
around it.
Traditionally, what you have to do is, yeah, if it's all one word, you can get away with not putting those quotes in, because it just assumes, hey, that's what you're using. If you have a key with a space in it, this is invalid. However, if you put this in quotes, that is now a valid key. So it's kind of like shorthand to get away with not putting in the quotes there. And the reason why Prettier is letting me get away with the quotes up here is because we have another break in tradition, right? The quotes with a space is one way. The other way is if I don't put quotes here, I'm pretty sure Prettier, yeah, it's letting me get away with that because I have that trailing 0 in there. So you can use, it does say properties are identified using key values. A property key is either an ECMAScript, which is JavaScript string value, or a symbol value. Our string and symbol values, including the empty string, are valid as property keys. A property name is a property key that is a string value. So even though I don't have this in quotes here, it is still treating it as a string, just like this is treated as a string as well. Brian, are you talking?
Oh, and I'm guessing it's understanding that because of the way it's structured, it's just understanding that this is a key value pair and we'll treat it as a string instead of a number.
Correct. Because it's on the left side of the colon, it doesn't matter if we use the quotes or not, it's going to treat it as a string.
Okay, got you. That was a little confusing. That cleared up a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, and it is actually valid JavaScript to put it in a string if you wanted to. But if you have Prettier turned on, it's going to be like, nah, you don't really need them and strip them out. But it is valid to put quotes in there, and that is valid JavaScript. Tika, go ahead. Tika, did you have a question?
No, I'm okay. I got it.
Oh, okay. Okay, so let me just change some of these values so we can see it changing. Okay, not going to worry about the lower half there. Okay, so now we've got all of our data finally loaded up, right? And what we want to do is we want to say, when I click on here and I click on Ocean City, I want Ocean City's weather to show up instead. So we start by going back to our HTML. No, not school. And saying, hey, I need some way to hook on to my select. So I'm going to go find my select, and I'm going to add an ID of that called location. Then I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of my JavaScript. I'm going to ignore all of that data up there, and I'm going to say document, get element by ID, go get my select, and when it changes on change, get the event, and console log out changes. So I added my ID location to my select over here. And then in my JavaScript, I added this on change that grabbed the event and then just logged out changes. So over in my browser, whoops, get element by ID location. My bad. This should say location, not select. Proof that I am human. Okay, now when we come over to the browser, grab a value here and change it, we get changes. Added the ID location, added this down at the very bottom of my JavaScript, document get element by ID location. When it changes, grab the event and console log out changes. Now, just like our calculator, we need to know which one they selected based off of what, and set the data to that. So instead of console logging changes, I'm going to log out my event.target. And just like our input that had a value field, our select is also going to have a value. So I go back over to my browser, I change the location, and I get Ocean City, New Jersey 08226. Okay, but we stored our data in just 08226. How are we going to link those two together so we know which one to get? Well, it turns out that the option tag actually supports something called value. So for my manliest location, I'm going to say the value is 13104. And for Ocean City, I'm going to say the value is 08226. So I go back over to my browser, I change to 08226, and now look what comes out. And I take my 08226, I change it to manliest, and I get 13104. Okay, that's pretty cool. So I'm going to go back down to my JavaScript, and my event target value is giving me my zip code. And I know my zip code is up here. So can I take this a step further? Can I say, grab my weather data, and I can't just say .event.target.value because I don't have a key called event, a key called target, and a key called value. I want to use the value that is coming from event target value as my key. How do we do that?
Put it in brackets.
Bracket notation, baby. Now, when I go over and I select Ocean City, I get all of Ocean City's object in the console. And if I go back up and I change it to manliest, I get manliest's weather in the console. Okay, that's pretty cool. Let's put a pin in that. Let's actually save that and say const current city data is equal to our object. Okay, well, if we've got all of our current city data flowing, now this should be pretty easy for us, right? We come over here and we say, hey, we've got a call to with an ID of weather icon. Well, that's convenient. It's already an ID on there for us. What happens if we say document get element by ID, go grab the weather icon, and what do we want to set on that weather icon? We don't want to change this whole div. All we want to do is edit the HTML inside of it, that inner HTML. What do we want to set that inner HTML to? We want to set it to the current city data dot, and we're going to go back up in our JavaScript and see, hey, current icon has the information that we want in it. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to say current icon. I switch back over to my browser. I change to Ocean City. I have a cloud. I change it back to Manlius and I get the sun. Probably inverted of what the weather actually is, but you know, close enough. Okay. Now, I just want to take a minute here. We got document get element by ID. We took the inner HTML and we use current city data. If it makes more sense to you, you could actually take this object and stick it right in here. And it would do the exact same thing. That's because we're just storing this in something that's a little bit easier to type. So this code would work exactly the same way. We can switch between the locations and have it change. But it's a little bit easier to say current city data, or you know what, I'm actually going to change this to selected data. Might be a little easier to type, keep it all on one line. So now we get to run through all of this because we say, okay, current temp is already ID'd out. That is convenient. Document, get element by ID, current temp, go grab the inner HTML and set that to the selected data dot current temp. Okay, I come over here, I go to Ocean City and it's 38, and I go to Manlius and it's 95. Okay, this is cool. Go back to Ocean City, like that's all flowing. But now as soon as I refresh the page, Manlius is set, but it's pulling in 68. Well, what? If I click on Manlius, I switch it back, now I get 95. My data says it's 95 in Manlius. What's going on? I come back over here, I refresh, and if I change this back and forth, I get the right data. But where is that 68 coming from?
Your HTML.
My HTML still has the initial temperature as 68. So what happens is my JavaScript comes over here, my HTML all loads up and it goes, all right, I've got all this information to show. And then it says weather data. Okay, I'll remember what all of that weather data is. Sure, no problem. And then it comes down here and it goes, okay, get element by ID, location. And when it's changed, go ahead and update all of this data. But I don't want to do it on change. I want to say when the page first loads, go ahead and load in all of that data. So I could come down here and say, hey, when the page first loads, it's going to run all of my code. So I could say get element by ID weather icon. I'm going to do it with actually the current temp instead. I could put that code in there that says, hey, grab the current temp and set it to my weather data with the 13104 zip code and then the current temp of that. So I come back over here, I refresh. Now I've got my 95 in there, but I would need to repeat that for all of the stuff I'm putting in here. Wouldn't it be nice if we could make a section of our code that would be able to rerun based off of either our default location or based off of what location was selected in the dropdown? So what we're going to do is we're going to come up here and we're going to say we're going to make a new function called update HTML. And the parameter it's going to take is the selected zip code. Then we're going to take our documents that are updating and put it in that updated HTML. And we are going to say the selected data is coming from our weather data selected zip code. Finally, down here, all we're going to do is say, hey, when the page first loads, update the HTML with our default zip code of 13104. And when we change the location, update the HTML using the event dot target dot value.
Um,
I'm
Let
going to
me
go through
pause.
that again. Don't
Yeah.
worry. So now when I come over here, I refresh the page and I have a syntax error. 74, I forgot my equal arrow. So now when I refresh the page, I start off at 95. When I switch it to Ocean City, I get back to 38. And when I come over, I get to 95. Okay, that's doing what I want. There's a whole heck of a lot of code that we had to change to make it that way. So let's dive into that a little bit. Initially, I had my on change doing all of the lifting, right? I had my on change saying, hey, go update these values. The problem was that when the page was first loading, this on change event didn't work, right? Because we hadn't changed any of the values. So what I said is, well, all of the code in here, I also want to run when the page first loads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my own function called update HTML that will run whenever I either change the location or the page first loads. So what I said here was I still need my location on change. My event is still going to have my target value. What's my value? My value is my zip codes coming from my selects. Where is it? Over here. So what happens here on change 13104, this location got changed. This location is here. The 13104 is sent into the event. The event target value now becomes my 13104. We pass that in to our selected zip code right here. Now my selected zip code goes to my update HTML and knows that my 13104 is here. That selected zip code gets passed in right here. Selected zip code then goes into my weather data object and pulls out all the weather data and stores it in selected data. Now from the selected data, we grab some keys out from that. Like the current icon and current temp coming from our selected data right here. We grab out the current icon all the way from our data up at the top and set that in to whatever our weather icon is. But because all of this code is reusable, because we put it in our update HTML, we are also able to call, hey, when the page first loads, run our update HTML and use 13104 as the starting selected zip code. So all of this code in here runs just like it runs if we did an on change. We were able to create this update HTML to reuse that code in two different situations. One for the on change and one when the page first loads. I'm going to take a minute there and just let that soak in a little bit.
My code is not working. Like my console is not working.
Share screen.
And then this is
You've got one too many delete on 39. You've got a curly brace that shouldn't be there. And then 13206 should have a colon between that and the object.
a what?
A
What's
colon.
Oh, right here. Like
Yeah. Not that, that's semicolon.
right
you need a
here?
Regular colon. No. You had it in the right spot. It just needed to be a colon. Yeah, there you go. And then a comma on 38 after the curly.
A comma.
Yeah. Okay. Now that looks good. Save. And do you have any other errors? Scroll down.
Hold on. I'm gonna try to, yeah.
That looks good. You've got updated HTML on line 90. It should just be update HTML 90.
There's a red squiggly on 74. It needs a comma.
No, it actually needs another closing curly. No, delete the semicolon, hit enter, and then put a closing curly. There you go.
And then there's this one.
Ooh. Oh, on 73, you
Mhm.
need a closing square. Yeah.
Do I delete the 76?
Yeah, you've got one too many closing curlies now. Okay. So I think you're back in shape there. And then the only thing you need
Nope.
on 87 is, line 3. Okay, go all the way up to the top. You need a colon on between those two. There you go.
Okay, so if I change it,
The only thing you're missing, go to your on change. All the way down at the bottom. You need to put in 87, update HTML event.target.value. Oh, no. Put that back.
select the data.
EVT.
Huh?
Put event back in there. And then in 87,
Oh, in 87.
yeah. Put update HTML. Parentheses. That's
Okay.
where you want your event target value.
Which is selected zip code.
Yes.
So I should post select the zip code.
No, what selected zip code isn't defined. Event.target.value is.
Okay, event, target, value.
There you go.
Okay.
Now try it, and I think you should be in good shape.
Nope, it does not change. Oh, yeah, it does. Yep, it did change.
Cool.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, let's go through that again, because that was a lot of code that we changed all at once. But what we run into here is that we know this inner HTML code needs to run 2 times. This code that's updating all of our weather information needs to not only run whenever we change the dropdown, it needs to run the first time we load the page. And so what we do is update HTML needs one piece of information to do its job right. It needs to know what city to update the HTML to. So what we do is we give it a parameter. We say 13104. So when this page first loads, it says, okay, update HTML is this whole function up here. These parentheses are telling me go run all of the code between here and here. So all of the code in here is going to run whenever we call update HTML here. Now, 13104 is the one piece of information update HTML needs to know. So when we call that, selected zip code is now equal to 13104 for the length of this curly brace down to this curly brace. So we now say, great, selected zip code, wherever we see that, we know that's 13104. So we take 13104, we dump that into selected zip code, And now we go up to the weather data. We find that 13104 here, and we say take all of that data and store it into our selected data. So selected data now holds all of that weather data for Manlius. So we come in here and we say, get the selected data. That's what we just said in here. Go get the current icon from that selected data. Okay, what's that icon? That icon is the sun. So take that sun icon and dump it into my weather icon. Now go take that very same selected data, grab the current temp, and shove that into my element called current temp. My current temp element is coming from my current temp right here. So we update those two things, and it says, okay, when the page loads, set 95, set the sun in. Now our JavaScript is done. Takes a day off. It's like, I'm good to go. I finished all of that. I updated that for you. But we also said document get element by ID location. What is my location? My location is my select right here. So when it changes, capture that event. Okay, inside that event, grab the target. That is the event, what the event happened on, my whole select. Go grab the value from that event. Where's my value coming from? It's coming from right here. That means that when Ocean City is selected as a value, 08226 is going to trickle into the event here. We're going to extract the value of that out. This whole thing is going to become 08226. And because we are calling update HTML, which is right up here, we're also going to send in the zip code up here as the selected zip code. That means that everything in here is now going to be based off 08226 instead. So we're going to take all of that data based off of what was selected and update our current temp and our weather icon, the inner HTML, based off of what got selected here. So remember what I was saying to Jennifer at the beginning of this, when you know you're frustrated, you don't know why you're frustrated. At what point did I lose you guys?
Well, that second go around helped me understand it a little more. So that was really helpful. Yeah.
So if I'm
Bobby.
understanding correctly, we did a const for the update HTML and we set it to the selected zip code. And then we're sending that information so it runs the code that's on the bottom of it, which is the selected data for the weather app. Then it's going to run through the weather icon and the current temperature. And it's going to give us that information. Then it's going to go to the next location. And then when it runs the second time around, it's going to change the zip code because we have two values. We have the
Yeah,
value.
so this kind of gets completely ignored until the select changes.
Yeah,
So
so,
the-
so once it goes fully through, it comes back and what it does is it selects the second value, which is the second zip code, and then it runs the information again.
Correct. And then if we change that select again to the other zip code, it goes back through and reruns all of this again.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is running when the page first loads.
Yep.
If we leave this out and we look, our 68 is still in here. When we comment this back in, we say start at 13104, and update all of that based off of the object all up here. So in here, we come in and we say, okay, now it's 95. This code is completely ignored until that select changes. When that select changes, we get the value of what it changed to, which is coming from right here. Now we tell our update HTML the selected zip code is coming from the value that changed. So now we use that zip code and we say, hey, the selected zip code is now 08226. That means that selected data is going to be this whole object up here. Because of that, we are able to get out the current icon from up here, which is the cloudy and the current temp as 38. We go get the weather icon and the current temp from our HTML document, and we set those values into the inner HTML.
So I think the only difference is that we're starting with the last line, which is the update HTML, and then it runs through to get that information. It sets that information, and then it goes through again through that second the document.get element by ID to set the second one.
Correct. Bobby, go ahead.
I'm still getting a well, not still, but I'm getting an error in the console. I think I know what it is, but I just want to have you look at it, tell me,
Sure,
and then
go for it. Okay, so you're in the wrong. Oh, okay. You are missing your closing square bracket after 69.
I figured that was it.
Between 69 and 70.
So would I just go here, enter bracket?
Yep. And now you've got a different error that says selected data is not defined on 76. So let's look at 76. You've got select data instead of selected data on 75. Is your data different between the two locations?
I didn't change anything as far as like down here. So no, it's not different right now.
Okay. So if you change that just to a different temperature in one of the two of locations, like just set that to 30 or whatever. Now go to your browser and change between the two of them. Thought that was going to work. Let me see your HTML. Okay, you've got your zips in there. Go back to your weather.js. 13205. Okay, scroll down. Keep going all the way down to the bottom. Event target value. Oh, okay, here's your.
I think the 13204 wasn't in parentheses.
You've got a parenthesis here and a parenthesis here and a comma that you shouldn't have.
Oh.
And save that.
I'm just fucking doing shit, man. This shit is pissing me off. Fucking waving to people and shit. I think he had 13204 as a number, not as a string.
That in the object definition.
On the top.
Line
37, I think.
3713. Yeah, that should be okay. Let me.
13104, not 13204.
Oh, I gotcha. Go to your, here, let me just request here. Your values in the select in here. 13104 and 13205. These have to line up with your values in here. So,
Okay. They don't need to be strings on it. Okay, and HTML.
oh no, you've got that right. Oh, here you go. You're missing parentheses here. You're in business, my man.
Cool, thank you.
All right. Made it to the end of class. I know we did a lot there. How are we feeling about understanding here?
I know I'm gonna have to rewatch this a couple times personally.
The
Me
reason
too.
why we record all of this.
Yes.
Say all of last cohort, I had one class where everyone was like, oh my God, this is so helpful. I've been unstuck after 2 weeks. Like that visual really helped me. Your explanation did it. And it was the one class that I forgot to hit record on at the beginning of break and didn't have it all recorded. Fortunately, we are definitely recording tonight. Would one more time through help? Or
Yes.
no? Or are
Yes.
we?
Yes. Yes. I say yes. I don't know about anybody else, but I'll stick around for that one more time.
I understand it, but you should go over it one more time just to kind of.
Okay.
Well, look at you, Alba.
Do the arrows help on everything or just talk through it without the visual?
Sometimes they help.
Sometimes they do. I think.
I like the arrows.
Do we want to try it without the arrows and just double clicking on things, or do we want to do arrows again? Doesn't matter to me. Trust me, I
Arrows.
understand this. Okay. Well, let's do the arrows. So the problem that we ran into, we had all of our on change working, right? We had it so that when we switched between the two locations, the correct data was showing up. The problem was that when the page first loaded, we also needed the correct data to show up. So we could have taken all of the code that we had in this on change and copied and pasted it down here. But now what happens if we add an additional piece of data? We want to create one place called update HTML that's going to take care of all of our updating for us. So what we do is we create a function, our own custom function up here called update HTML. Now, update HTML needs one piece of information to work. It needs to know what selected zip code is coming in. That selected zip code.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
Do you mind if this is, I hope this is not an issue, but do you mind going like literally from the beginning? Not just from the code, like from the beginning of whether JS and just going through it all so that we can also see, because that would give us a better, especially me, I'm not talking about everybody else, I'm talking about myself, give us a better understanding of everything.
Okay, so we start all the way up at the top here, right, with our weather data.
Yeah.
Our weather data, we started it out as an object because we know that there is a location, which is going to be the key here, and there is a value for that location, which is going to be all the different weather data. So this weather data object only has 2 keys and 2 values. This key is 08226. The other key, if we follow this indentation all the way down, is 13104. Those are our 2 keys. The values for this key is this giant freaking object in here. And the value for the 13104 key is another giant object down here. So now we go inside that object. We know we wanted to make it an object because all of the data that we're setting is associated. In other words, 38 represents or is associated with the current temperature. So we know it's an object because of the curly brace. We also know it's an object because it has the key. It's separated by colon, and then it has the value. And the value can be a string, or it can be a number, or it could even be an array or another object. So we were doing fine up here. We're just cruising along. We're giving it all this different information. And then we got down to the forecast. And we're like, well, the forecast is a whole other separate piece of information. Really, it's a list of 5 days worth of information.
Okay.
So what we do is we make an array.
Okay.
And in that array, well, it's not just the name of the day or just the current temperature. We've got more associative data in that. So what we do is we create another object, and we separate that out with a comma, so the array knows another object is headed your way.
Okay. So you have an object, and within that object, there's an array, which is the forecast.
Correct.
And then within that array, there's an object. There's multiple objects in there.
Correct.
Okay.
So what we have starting all the way up at the top is an object that has a zip code as the key and an object as the value.
Okay.
That object stores all of this in key value pair information and also has a key called forecast, but this forecast is an array, just like this current temp key is a number and this is a string. So this forecast is an array, but it's not only an array, it's an array of objects. And those objects all have their own key value pairs. In this object, we happen to have a string, and a number as the values or the data types.
Okay.
Okay, so we come all the way down here.
Same thing.
Same thing, right? 13104 is the key. It's an object. The objects have key value pairs. The values. I don't know how that happened. The values could be an array, and those arrays could have any piece of information in them. These happen to have objects. So now we come all the way down here and we say update HTML. Forget about it. No one told you to run update HTML. We just told you what update HTML was. Then we come down here and it says get element by ID. Okay, location. I'd come over here. I get the location on change. You didn't change me yet. Forget about it. None of that code runs. Then we come down here and it goes, oh, update HTML. You are telling me to run it because there are parentheses there. Those parentheses are saying go run update HTML with the selected zip code of 13104.
Okay.
Jennifer, go ahead.
Parentheses are a function.
The parentheses here are telling it to run or execute the function
Okay.
called update HTML. So this is an argument here. It's an argument because we are telling it when we call the function, the argument we're calling it with is 13104. That gets passed in to the parameter up here called selected zip code. Now it goes, great. You're not only telling me to update the HTML, you're telling me what zip code to update it with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find weather data, and I'm going to go use your zip code 13104 to go get all of this good information up here. And I'm going to take that entire object and store it into selected data. Now I am going to take selected data, get the current icon, and know that's the sun. So I'm going to take the sun and I'm going to go find my weather icon over in your HTML document that is right here. And I'm going to take that sun coming from the selected data and set it into the HTML for the weather icon ID in my document. I'm also going to do the same thing with my current temp. I'm going to go find it in my HTML. I'm going to go update the inside of that HTML div to set it to whatever my current temp is coming from my selected data, which is coming from up here, which means it's going to pull in this from right here. So now the JavaScript gets down here and goes, I've updated the HTML, I've run all of this code, I'm done. And it is for now. But in the back of its head, it's got this get element by ID on change. It's prepared for whenever this select changes. How do we know it's a select? Because if we go over and look at our select, we get our ID location here. So what we're saying is when it changes, go run this function in here. Okay, in order to run that function, we need to get the event target value. What is that value? It's the value of whatever zip code got selected here. So now the event target value is now equal to 08226 because that's what they selected. The event was them selecting it. The target was what the thing they were selecting, and the value of that target is 08226. Now that 08226 goes into update HTML, and it's like, I know what update HTML is. I already did it once. I did it once down here. I'm doing the same exact thing here, except now I'm using whatever value got passed in from the option. So I'm coming back up here, and now because those parentheses are in there, you're telling me to run it again. But instead of running it with 13104, I'm going to run it with whatever value came in from the select. So I'm still going to come into my weather data. I'm going to say, oh, the selected zip code is 08226. That means all the selected data is going to be this stuff up here. So go get the current temp and the icon from Ocean City, go update those same two IDs, but now take whatever data is coming in for the selected city and put it in to my ID, my document.getElementById inner HTML. And what all of that means is when the page first loads, it's going to store all my data in memory. It's going to ignore update HTML. It's going to ignore the on change. It's going to come down to the update HTML. It's going to see these parentheses in here, and it's going to say, I need to run all of this code. This code is going to pull out the data from our big weather data and just use the 13104 data. That's going to get the icons out and the data out and set it into our HTML over here. Then the browser's like, I'm done. I loaded that data for you. We wait, we let it sit. And then we come up here and we change this to 08226. It goes, oh crap, location, that's the select. Something changed. Go tell the computer, hey, update the HTML based off of the value that got set in the event. That update HTML comes up here, goes, I know what update HTML is. Selected zip code comes in from the value that got selected. We go back into our big data. We pull out the only location that we care about. We then use that to set the icon back into our HTML. This is 84 lines of code. Next week, we'll be up to about 200.
This is nested data, right?
I hope so.
This is nested data.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Nested data, nested objects, nested arrays.
I get the array and all that stuff, like creating it. My only problem is making it work. Like the bottom part right here where it's const update array. I just don't really understand how to like call the right stuff and make it work. Since yet, you know, I'll practice, of course, but yeah.
So that school exercise is a good one to say, all right, I want to get this piece of information out, right? So how can I keep pulling away a layer of the onion to get more and more specific with my data till I get that exact thing that I want to come out. That is a great way to practice with nested data. In
Now,
your
if it-
JavaScript here, we know that this needs to be its own function because we were about to copy and paste all of this code to run when the page first loaded. So we said, hey, let's make that its own function, and we can use that in both places. On a scale of 1 to certainly mega fried, how fried are your brains right now?
Seven.
I literally just said that 7.
Good. When we hit 9, throw up the warning light for me, would you?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat as a icon.
Just an fried egg on one side, the pan, the brain, number 9. I'll get it.
This is your brain encoding.
Good one.
This is your brain on coding when Max has you for 3 hours.
Wow, I am dreaming this, by the way. It's not helping, but I am dreaming it.
I'm going to put all of this code in our live stream for tonight. We're going to spend a little bit more time tomorrow on this. This project does not go away. And I have a 7-hour drive tomorrow before class. So I've got plenty of time to think up new ways of frying your brains on Thursday before we go into the weekend. I did lie last night. There is a homework assignment. It is the homework assignment that Ariel posted in Slack. So over the weekend, get your 100-word description of what you would like your intro blog post to say. And that is now the week 8 homework in Canvas. So go ahead and submit that. And then the only other homework is those small number, just a couple of those free code camp exercises, 156 of them.
Did you figure out how we could submit those?
I did not. I will do that over the weekend. And right now go off of trust until I have a better way of doing that. I ran into the problem of realizing that all 156 would not fit on the screen at the same time. So you couldn't really screenshot them. And they actually took away the feature where I can go into your profile and see what exercises you had completed. So I've got to do some homework for me this weekend to figure out what the best way is for you guys to submit them.
So I know that on Free Code Camp at the top of each section that is it within the homework assignment, it'll say the amount of questions that you've done / the amount of questions that are left. You can just obviously just screenshot those and then
That might be what I end up doing.
Yeah.
Also, real quick, there's a Chrome extension called Go Full Page. I've used it for other things, and it's very simple. It will literally screenshot a whole page, and make it a long document if you need to.
Yeah, I've got one different name, same idea. I just didn't want to make everyone go through installing a Chrome extension. So I just have to see there are some benefits. Free Code Camp has a classroom that you can enroll your students in and then check on their progress as they go. And just because we do other the HTML assignments, I thought that might be worthwhile, but I might end up going for the KISS solution. Keep it simple, stupid. Or my favorite, keep it simple, shithead.
I find shithead less offensive than stupid. That's because I work in mental health. Awesome.
All right. You guys have an awesome evening. If there are any terms that popped up tonight, capture them. We will make sure to have some time tomorrow to get them all written down. Do not worry. I will stay up until this video is done converting, and we'll have it up on YouTube within the hour. A little over the hour. It takes a minute for them to process. So I will get this uploaded for you guys. Otherwise, have an awesome evening, and I will see you all tomorrow.
You have a great night.
Good night, guys.
Night.
Max, can you look at my code, please?